Out in the desert, a weak radio hum broke the silence. Could this be the lifeline someone's been waiting for? Inside, a shack of dust and wires. An old man adjusted the frequency dial. Echo 6 position compromised. Need evac. Anyone copy? He pressed the mic. This is Whiskey J. I hear you. The radio hissed, then popped. A spark shot from the panel. Power flickered. He didn't move. Just reached under the desk, flipped the switch on the backup generator. Let's see if this old ghost can still shout. Outside, the signal pulsed through the darkness, the only voice left on air. And someone was listening. They called him a relic, a whisper in the dust, or sometimes just the old man in the shack. Walt Jennings, 82 years old, lived alone at the far edge of the Nevada desert, where the nearest neighbor was a mile of dry road and a decade of silence away. He didn't use a cell phone, didn't have a television. His mailbox was nothing more than an old ammo can bolted to a fence post no one had touched since Clinton was in office. But what Walt did have, what he lived for, was his radio. Every night, just as the desert light faded to a blue hush and the coyotes took their place in the dark, he powered up a small transmitter he'd rebuilt by hand from parts salvaged over 40 years. The vacuum tubes hummed, the antenna crackled, and the red-on-one air bulb above his desk flickered to life. He'd clear his throat, lean toward the microphone, and say the same words he'd said for the last 29 years. This is Whiskey J broadcasting from the silence. Then came the quiet, the warm hiss of AM static. No music, no commercials, just that voice and that hum radiating through the night like a heartbeat under the sand. The frequency was 760 kHz low-band AM. The kind of wavelength you'd only pick up on an old car stereo if the sky was clear and the ground was still. No one really listened anymore. A handful of folks in the nearest town, Carson Ridge, knew about him. At the diner, he was the punchline to a tired joke. Still talking to ghosts, that one. Man thinks he's calling the moon. The younger ones didn't even know what AM radio was. And if they did, they couldn't imagine why anyone would bother using it. Spotify had killed the airwaves. Podcasts had buried them. But not for Walt. Because for Walt Jennings, this wasn't about audience. It wasn't even about nostalgia. It was ritual. A habit carved so deep into his bones that it didn't need purpose, only persistence. Once long ago, he had been a signal specialist in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War. Not a soldier with a rifle, but the kind who could rewire a blown transmitter under fire or boost a dead signal using aluminum foil and a paperclip. He'd run comms for forward operating bases in Khe Sanh and Pleiku. He could read radio static like another man might read tea leaves. His job was to listen when others couldn't, to hear the faintest call through walls of noise, and to make sure help got where it needed to be. He never forgot the voices that came through. Some were frantic, some calm, some were cut off mid-sentence and never heard again. When the war ended, Walt came home. He got a job in telecommunications, got married, raised a son, but the voice inside never left. The compulsion to keep the line open never faded. So, he built his own system right there in the desert. And every night since, Whiskey J had been on the air, not for ratings, not for money, but because you don't turn off the radio while the world's still spinning, even if no one else is listening. Because one day, someone might. And on that day, Walt would be there, still tuned in, still steady, still sending his voice out into the silence. Walt Jennings never fired a rifle in combat, but he saved lives, dozens of them, with nothing more than a microphone, copper wire, and a steady hand. During the Vietnam War, he was deployed as a signal communication specialist tasked with setting up and maintaining radio systems for field units often isolated deep in enemy territory. While others dug trenches or ran patrols, Walt dug through static, malfunctioning transmitters, and blown-out field gear. He didn't need to see the front line. He could hear it through faint bursts of transmission, garbled call signs, and the click of Morse code that barely escaped the jungle noise. He worked quietly behind the scenes, rerouting signals, patching broken relays, guiding medevac choppers through low clouds and high fire. He had a reputation even then. If you can't reach base, his commanding officer once said, call Whiskey J. He'll find you. Whiskey J wasn't just a call sign, it was a lifeline. And Walt never forgot the voices that came through. Some were panicked. Some whispered through injury. Some were calm in a way that only the doomed could sound. He wrote them all down in a little black notebook he kept in his rucksack. Unit numbers, locations, timestamps. Some he marked with stars, confirmed rescues. Others he underlined in red lost before help arrived. When he came home in 1973, Walt buried the notebook in a drawer. He didn't talk about it. Not to his wife, not even to his son. His son Eddie was everything Walt had hoped for. A good man, a bright kid, and eventually a soldier. Eddie didn't go into radio. He chose infantry, wanting to be closer to where things mattered. Walt had his doubts. He didn't argue, but he knew something his son didn't yet understand. War never stays on the battlefield. It follows you. It whispers even when the radio is off. In 1991, Eddie was deployed during Operation Desert Storm. He led a patrol convoy through the Kuwaiti desert. A roadside IED took the entire lead vehicle. Eddie died instantly. Walt got the visit 2 days later. The knock on the door, the folded flag, the practiced words from an officer too young to know who he was talking to. His wife Margaret didn't last long after that. She passed within the year. Stroke. The doctor said Walt didn't blame her heart. He blamed the silence. The house was too quiet after they were both gone. So one night, Walt did something he hadn't done in almost 2 decades. He went into the garage, dug through the boxes, pulled out the old transmitter parts, the coaxial cables, the tubes, the soldering kit. Then he walked out into the desert behind his property and raised a new antenna tower. Not as tall as the ones he built in Vietnam, but just as solid. He rewired everything from scratch. No digital, no internet, just analog bones and ghost signals. That night, he turned the power on, watched the dials warm, and keyed the mic. This is Whiskey J broadcasting from the silence. He didn't expect a response. That wasn't the point. He broadcast every night after that, not to be heard, not even to speak. But to remind the universe and maybe himself of one thing: I'm still here. I haven't quit. And as long as the tower stood, as long as the dials glowed, as long as the radio hummed through the quiet Nevada air, Whiskey J would stay on the air. Half a world away from the Nevada desert, in the unforgiving mountains near the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, 6 American soldiers were running out of time. Echo 6, a covert special operations team, had been deployed on a high-risk surveillance mission. Their objective: gather intelligence on a suspected weapons transfer involving regional militants. It was supposed to be a 72-hour in-and-out operation. No firefight, no engagement. But everything changed on the second night. Their position was compromised. The hillside where they had set up camp was lit up by tracer rounds just after midnight. By dawn, 2 men were wounded and the team had been forced into a narrow ravine. Radio contact with command was lost during the retreat. Their field transmitter showed connection, but no response, dead air. That was the first sign something much bigger was happening. Back in Washington, D.C., inside a secure underground wing of the Pentagon, the situation escalated quickly. Screens lit up with flashing red alerts. A full comms blackout began spreading across military networks. At first, they suspected localized interference, jamming techniques used by enemy forces. But within minutes, analysts confirmed the worst-case scenario. A coordinated cyber attack was underway. One by one, secure communication systems went down. SATCOM offline. UHF non-responsive. VHF scrambled beyond recovery. Even backup satellites failed to respond. Layers of encryption had been peeled back, rerouted, or blocked. It wasn't just a failure in communication. It was a precision strike on command infrastructure. High-level meetings were called. Emergency playbooks opened. But without a working channel to field teams, every commander in the room knew one truth: they were blind. Echo 6 was still out there, alive, maybe trapped, definitely, but no one could reach them, and they couldn't reach back. By hour 3, desperation started to crack the edges of the situation room. That's when someone at a side console, Lieutenant Avery Knox, part of the signals recovery unit, brought up something few had looked at in years: a low-band redundancy map. It was a relic of the Cold War, a contingency list of ground-based analog radio frequencies that might survive a full digital blackout. Most of the stations had been decommissioned. Many were now abandoned. A few, Knox knew, had never actually existed outside theory, but he ran a sweep anyway, scanning the dial across a dusty receiver built before he was born. For almost 15 minutes, nothing. Then it came, a faint signal on AM 760. Barely audible at first, a slow, steady tone, followed by a voice. "This is Whiskey J broadcasting from the silence." Knox blinked. He turned the gain up, fed the signal through the audio stabilizer. The voice came back again, clearer this time. "Broadcasting low and clear, grid stable. This is Whiskey J." He pulled up the database. There it was, buried in a footnote. Unlicensed AM signal recorded intermittently from Nevada desert region. Presumed civilian. Potential hoax. No coordinates. No name. Just a legend among comm circles. But Knox had a gut instinct. This was a signal. He flagged it to command. At first, the officers dismissed it. A ghost frequency. Probably some ham operator playing Cold War nostalgia. But then Knox fed them the second piece, the structure of the signal. It wasn't idle rambling. The intervals were precise. The waveform modulation matched military legacy patterns exactly. One commander leaned forward. "You're saying someone is broadcasting military-grade analog signal from inside the continental U.S.? "Yes, sir," Knox replied, "and he's on the only frequency that's still reaching Echo 6. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot." Within minutes, Knox converted Echo 6's last known coordinates and mission data into an analog packet formatted in legacy alpha cipher, the same encryption style used during Vietnam. He sent the burst 4 times, then waited. 2 minutes later, the speaker cracked to life. Message received. Relay confirmed. "I'm on the air." Knox turned slowly, staring at the screen. "Sir," someone answered. And just like that, the myth of Whiskey J wasn't a ghost story anymore. He was real, and he was the only line left. Walt Jennings was halfway through a reading from a 1968 Army survival manual when the hum in his headphones changed. It was subtle at first, just a break in the static, a low buzz buried under the usual drone of dead air. He leaned forward, adjusted the frequency dial, and tapped the side of the receiver. Then a voice clipped, garbled, but real. "Echo 6 requesting evac. Hostiles inbound. Coordinates attached. Any station red, repeat. Any station red." Walt froze. The signal was faint, likely bouncing across the upper atmosphere from halfway around the world. He'd heard his share of odd broadcasts over the years. Pirate stations, storm chasers, even the occasional prankster trying to spoof old military codes. But this wasn't noise. This was patterned. This was structured. And whoever was speaking was in trouble. He reached for his pencil and notepad, jotted down the timestamp, the frequency shift, and the voice's cadence. It was American, trained, a soldier. He sat back, doubtful. Still, it could be a recording, a hoax, someone playing war games from their basement. But then the signal cut in again, stronger. Echo 6 requesting immediate extraction. Coordinates follow. We are surrounded. Repeat. Surrounded. Hostiles inbound from Northwest Ridge. Short-range ammo only. Please advise. Anyone copy? Walt didn't move. His fingers hovered above the mic switch. His heart pounded. The last time he'd heard a voice like that on a channel like this, he was in his 20s, crouched under a tarp in the rain outside. He swallowed hard. Then he pressed the button. "This is Whiskey J. I hear you. Stand by." He let go, staring at the equipment like it might catch fire. Was this really happening? After all these years, all the nights of dead air and fading frequencies, someone was calling. And not just anyone. Echo 6. A designation that hadn't been used for decades. But Walt knew the format. He knew the tone. And he knew one thing above all. This wasn't a simulation. It was a real call for help. And there was no one else on the line. No military tower, no encrypted satellite, just him, a rusted antenna, and the one system still standing when everything else had gone dark. He keyed the mic again. Echo 6, relay confirmed. I have your coordinates. Transmitting acknowledgement now. Keep this frequency clear. Help is coming. The room was silent except for the low hum of the transmitter and the scratch of pencil on paper as Walt began scribbling down grid markers. His hands moved fast, his breath steady. The old instincts kicked in like muscle memory. Then something in his chest settled. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a test. It was the moment he'd somehow been waiting for without ever saying so. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was the only one left on the air. And someone out there, someone real, was listening. Walt hadn't moved this fast in years. The minute the last transmission from Echo 6 came through, he shoved aside the old binder of broadcast notes and swung open the side panel of his main transmitter. Dust puffed into the air and his knees cracked as he dropped to the floor, reaching behind the unit. He twisted the copper gain coil 2 notches clockwise, bypassing the limiter, something he hadn't done since Reagan was in office. The dial needle shot into the red. His transmitter groaned under the stress. "Don't you quit on me now," he muttered. Next, he opened the cabinet under his workbench and pulled out a military surplus signal booster from the late 70s, one he'd sworn he'd never use unless the world ended. It wasn't pretty, but it was solid. He ran jumper cables from the base power line into the converter, double-checked the grounding, then threw the switch. The shack went dark for a second, then everything lit back up brighter, louder. The main console buzzed with life, meters twitching like they hadn't in years. Static poured through the speakers, sharp and clear. Walt didn't smile. There was no time. He moved to the shelf and grabbed his folded topographic map of eastern Afghanistan. He unfolded it carefully, smoothing it out with the edge of his arm. Dozens of old pencil markings traced past broadcast paths and atmospheric bounce angles. He hadn't touched it in over a decade, but somehow he still knew where everything was. Using a small flashlight and a magnifying glass, he began cross-referencing Echo 6's coordinates with elevation data and potential line-of-sight relay paths. His hands were steady, his breath shallow. The goal was simple: maximize signal clarity and relay power and hold it as long as possible. He grabbed his reel-to-reel recorder, the one with the broken eject lever and the faint smell of solder. He'd rigged it years ago to run continuously as a looping broadcast assistant. He loaded a fresh tape and began recording Echo 6's last call, overlaying it with his own confirmation message. "This is Whiskey J relaying signal for Echo 6. Coordinates received. Broadcast live. Do not change position." He repeated it 3 times and let the tape roll. Then came the heat. The system began to strain. The old wires behind the amplifier hissed. A spark jumped from one of the fuse contacts. Walt smelled the sharp bite of burning insulation. He lunged for the breaker panel, killed the auxiliary heater, and rediverted power to keep the antenna feed alive. "We've made it this far," he muttered. "You're not dying before they get out." He replaced a smoking relay using bare fingers and pliers, cursed under his breath when the side panel shocked him, then wrapped the wire with electrical tape torn from the wall. Every broadcast cycle was a gamble. Would the next burst go through? Would the next jolt fry the system? Would the next 10 seconds be the difference between life and silence? He didn't know. Didn't care. All he knew was that 6 men were somewhere out there holding their position, waiting on a voice in the desert. And he was that voice. He pressed the mic again. "Echo 6, this is Whiskey J, transmission stable. Signal holding. Keep talking, boys. I've got you." Walt didn't pause. Didn't rest. Didn't leave the chair. Because tonight, he wasn't just broadcasting. He was fighting a war, one voltage spike at a time. At 0400 hours Eastern Time, inside a secure communications wing of the Pentagon, the mood was grim. Entire sections of the U.S. military's global communications network were still paralyzed. VHF, UHF, satellite links scrambled or cut off by the cyber attack. Analysts sat hunched over silent terminals. Lines of failed code blinked like heart monitors gone flat. Then something changed. A message came in through a fallback relay. Primitive analog, but clear. Echo 6 position confirmed. Transmission stable. Relay by Whiskey J. The room froze. The message repeated again. Again. Confirmed timestamp. Valid coordinates. The origin, an unregistered AM 760 kHz signal out of rural Nevada. Who the hell is Whiskey J? Colonel Dana Mallister barked from the situation table. A young signals tech, Lieutenant Avery Knox, raised his hand. Ma'am, we've been monitoring that same frequency. The man's been relaying Echo 6 signal for the past hour, real time. His equipment's old, but it's holding steady. Is it military? Mallister asked. Knox hesitated. Not officially, but I ran the waveform patterns through archival recognition. Ma'am, this guy isn't just winging it. He's using Army FieldComm protocols from Vietnam. Format codes, relay cadence, perfectly matched. Mallister stepped closer. Name? Knox keyed into a database so old the interface still ran in grayscale. After several seconds, a file appeared. A photograph, a report, a name in bold across the top. Walt Jennings, SFC, retired Signal Corps, 1967 to 1973, 12 confirmed field rescue assists via low-band analog comms, declined. The radio did the work. I just listened. A pause fell over the room. Behind them, a voice cut in. General Richard Kelton, a hardened gray-haired veteran, pulled back from retirement for situations just like this. He stepped forward slowly, squinting at the screen. I knew that call sign, he said quietly. Whiskey J never missed a message. Not once. Kelton tapped the photo, then turned to the room. That man routed chopper extractions in Cambodia during the 70 offensive using nothing but copper wire and a prayer. Every unit trusted him, even when command didn't. He turned to Mallister. You want Echo 6 home? Then you give him what he needs. And you don't touch that frequency. A few officers exchanged skeptical glances. Sir, he's 82, civilian, operating on unlicensed hardware. Kelton's eyes narrowed. And he's outperforming half of our modern systems while we sit here waiting for a reboot. They move fast. A special operations comms team began monitoring Walt's broadcast full-time. Engineers were ordered to digitally mirror his analog signal to ensure redundancy. The CIA offered satellite flyovers to validate Echo 6's coordinates. But even they admitted, without Whiskey J's feed, Echo 6 was blind. In less than an hour, Walt Jennings, once dismissed as a ghost, became the most important link in the chain of U.S. military operations. Kelton stood at the edge of the command table, watching the green light blink every time Walt's signal cycled through. He smiled slightly, then muttered, still listening, huh, Walt? You old bastard. The room moved with purpose now. Hope, once silent, began to hum on 760 AM. Because the man they forgot never forgot how to listen. The clock on the wall read 3:27. Walt Jennings hadn't taken his eyes off the transmitter in hours. The signal meter glowed softly under the red light of the shack. Beside him, a clipboard was covered in hand-drawn time logs and transmission loops. Echo 6's coordinates had been confirmed, translated, cleaned, and resent dozens of times. Each cycle was transmitted at full power, 7-second burst-coded confirmations, terrain adjustments, evac markers. Walt never blinked when the shack trembled from a surge or when the backup coil hissed from the heat. He just adjusted, tuned, and kept the line alive. The old man had one job: make sure the birds could find them. He'd been relaying updates every 90 seconds. The airwaves hummed with urgency. His fingertips were blistered from soldering a replacement capacitor mid-transmission. He hadn't eaten, barely sipped water, but his voice still steady. Echo 6, this is Whiskey J. Your coordinates are transmitting strong. Hold position. Air assets are en route. You're not alone. 6,000 meters away in the Baran foothills along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, the men of Echo 6 crouched in silence. Their boots were soaked from meltwater. 2 were injured. 1 was unconscious. The air was cold, dry, and sharp. They had waited for death. Now they waited for a sound. Then it came. A low, distant thumping. Faint at first, then growing louder. Rhythmic. Reese, the team leader, snapped his head up. He knew that sound. Everyone did. Rotors. The night split open. A Black Hawk helicopter came in low over the eastern ridgeline, flanked by 2 Apaches in blackout formation. Their navigation lights were dimmed. Dust kicked up like a storm as the Black Hawk dipped hard into the landing zone they'd marked with smoke and a heat flare, just like Whiskey J said. "Let's move," Reese shouted. The team scrambled. 1 man carried 1, limping the rest, covering from behind. The helicopter's ramp dropped before it even landed. 2 crewmen jumped out, waving them forward. Reese grabbed the comms handset from his pack and switched to the backup band, the one they'd left open since the start of the mission. In the roar of wind and engine, he raised the mic. "Whiskey J, if you're out there, we owe you our lives." The team surged into the Black Hawk. The ramp lifted, doors slammed shut. The helicopter peeled up fast, angled out, and rose into the night. Rounds cracked from the hills behind them, but the Apaches answered with fire of their own. They were out. Back in Nevada, Walt heard the words through a wash of static. His hands relaxed, his shoulders slumped back. He stared at the blinking signal light on his console, green, unwavering. He reached for the mic one last time. "You boys don't owe me a thing," he said, voice low but clear. "Just get home." He released the button, slowly, pulled off his headset, and placed it on the desk. The tape on the reel-to-reel player behind him continued to spin. The final recorded message looped softly. "Mission received. Echo 6 safe. Transmission standing by." Walt leaned back in his chair and looked toward the window. Out in the distance, the tall antenna tower still stood, battered by wind, held together by rust, memory, and faith. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. His job was done. He had spent decades waiting, hoping someone out there would need the signal. That all the static and silence had meant something. And now, 6 voices had answered. 6 men were alive. Because an old man never turned off the radio. Because Whiskey J never missed a message. 1 week later, a military reporter from Valor Stories made the long drive into the Nevada desert. The article had already gone viral across military channels, "The Man Who Saved Echo 6 Without Leaving a Shack." But by the time the reporter arrived, it was already too late. The cabin was quiet. The screen door creaked open in the wind. A faint hum buzzed inside, low and steady. The transmitter was still running. On the desk next to the microphone, a single headset rested gently on its side. The reel-to-reel tape had stopped spinning, frozen mid-loop. The red light on the transmitter glowed, no voice, but the current still alive. Walt Jennings had passed some time during the night, seated in the very chair where he had spoken his last words. There were no signs of struggle, no distress, just a man who had finished what he came here to do. On the wall above the desk was a photo. Walt and his son Eddie, both in uniform, smiling beneath an American flag. The frame was worn, but the image clear. Beside it was a handwritten note, folded once, placed carefully at the top of the operating log. "To anyone still listening, never turn off the signal." The reporter stood there in silence for several minutes. He didn't touch anything. He didn't need to. By that evening, the story had made national news. Military forums, veteran groups, and broadcast networks began sharing the details. Civilians were moved by the sacrifice. But it was the soldiers, the men and women who knew what it meant to rely on a voice in the dark, who spoke loudest. They called him a legend, a guardian, the last signal man. Members of Echo 6 gave public statements. They credited Walt by name. He was the voice we didn't know we needed, but the one that never left us. A week later, the Army Corps of Engineers erected a simple metal plaque just outside Walt's shack near the base of his antenna. It read, "This frequency once saved lives." In silence, he spoke the loudest. Walter Jennings, Whiskey J, 1941 to 2023. They didn't take down the antenna. They left it standing, still humming, still whole. And late at night on 760, some say you can still hear the faint sound of static, maybe even a whisper if you listen long enough. Because some frequencies don't die. They wait. They carry. And they remember, especially when someone like Walt was the one keeping them alive. Some signals never die. They may fade. They may get buried under noise. But they wait for someone willing to listen. Walt Jennings was one of those rare people who didn't need attention. Didn't chase recognition. He just kept showing up night after night because he believed someone out there might need to hear one true voice. In today's fast, noisy world, could we all use a little more of that quiet persistence? Maybe that's what we're all missing. A little more honor, a little more of what Walt stood for. Do your part, even if no one's watching, especially if no one's watching. This story wasn't about technology. It was about responsibility, service, and the power of a single person doing what's right, even when the rest of the world thinks it doesn't matter anymore. And now, we'd like to hear from you. Have you ever known a Walt in your life? Someone who stayed the course long after others gave up? Someone who never needed applause? Just the peace of knowing they did their job. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us how this story made you feel. And if you served or know someone who did, let us know what this meant to you. If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe to Valor Stories, and share it with someone who still believes that quiet voices can carry the farthest. Thank you for listening to the story of Whiskey J. And remember, no matter how loud the world gets, never turn off the signal.